Daily routine of business, affaires courantes ordinaires. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 36.8a, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 3 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Dépôt de projet de loi.
Tabling of documents.
Déclaration de
Statements by ministers.
rapport de délégation.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member, l'Honorable Député de Madawaska.
The Honourable Member for Madawaska, Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honour to table in both official languages the third report of the Standing Committee on Official Languages entitled Adaptation of CBC Radio Canada's Audiovisual Report Content for the International Market. Mr. Speaker, this was a unanimous agreement by the committee to condemn a decision by CBC with regard to a recording studio, to use a recording studio in Paris rather than in Quebec to avoid having people have to hear the Quebec accent. It's quite shameful. So I am prepared to table the documents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting reports from committees. Introduction of private members' bills. Mr. Calkins, seconded by Mr. Viss, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Food and Drug Act, Natural Health Products. Cette motion est réputée adoptée.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to introduce my private member's bill, which will amend the Food and Drugs Act. This bill will reverse the changes made by the NDP Liberal government in their omnibus budget bill C-47 earlier this year. It will return to the status quo for natural health products, ensuring that these products are not classified as therapeutic products, like synthetic drugs, and therefore not subject to the same regulatory regime as other drugs. Previously, natural health products were classified separately from pharmaceuticals due to the minimal risk they pose to their users. However, after the NDP Liberal coalition passed C-47, bureaucrats in Health Canada now can implement their self-care scheme, which, according to the National Health Products Association, will reduce choice, increase costs for consumers, drive businesses, investment, and product development out of Canada. The existing regulations, Madam Speaker, already keep Canadians safe, and as such, I urge all members in this House to listen to their constituents and the overwhelming amount of correspondence they received and vote for this bill. After 8 years, enough is enough. It's time to undo the damage done by C-47, kick out the gatekeepers, and save our supplements and vitamins.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Calkins, seconded by Mr. Viss, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed.
This motion is deemed adopted.
Reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House.
Introduction of private members' bills. Ms. Gladue, seconded by Mr. Halan, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Christian Heritage Month. This motion is deemed adopted. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to rise today to table this bill on Christian Heritage Month.
It's an honor to rise and to present this project members bill to make December Christian Heritage Month. Canada is a country that celebrates all faiths. We have Sikh Heritage Month, we have Hindu Heritage Month, we have Muslim History Month, we have Jewish Heritage Month, and so many more. But you know, Madam Speaker, it's only fair and right that we would have a Christian Heritage Month, since there's 19.6 million Christians in Canada, according to the last census. And what better month to pick than December, which starts with the season of Advent, the lighting of the hope candle, the lighting of the love candle, the lighting of the peace candle, and the joy candle, and culminating in the lighting of the Christ candle as we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ at Christmas, the Savior of the world. We've heard the Bloc speak even last week about the importance of Christmas in Quebec. We heard the Prime Minister talk about the importance of Christmas to all Canadians. And so I hope all my colleagues will join me in supporting this private member's bill to make December Christian Heritage Month. Merry Christmas et Joyeux Noël.
Madame Gladu, appuyée.
Ms. Gladu, seconded by Mr. Halan, moves that this bill be now read a first time and printed.
This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Introduction of private members' bills. Première lecture de projet de loi.
First reading of Senate public bills.
Motion.
Motions. The honourable member, I apologize.
Monsieur Desilets.
Mr. Desilets, seconded by Ms. Chabot, moves that the 13th report of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, presented on Thursday, November 9th, 2023, be concurred in debate. The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Good day, Madam Speaker. Since September, I have been following this file, and we're talking here about the National Monument to Canada's mission in Afghanistan. I had the pleasure of asking a first question in the first week that we returned to the House after the parliamentary return, but things have happened since that time. And each week we discover new things, new elements. I can tell you that the Bloc is not going to stop asking questions in this with regard to this terrible injustice. Today I'm here to try to shed light on what happened and demand that this terrible injustice be righted. For those who do not know what I'm referring to, I want to give a brief summary. The government organized a competition for the design of the National Monument to Canada's mission in Afghanistan. There was a request for proposals. There was a jury that was composed to pick the winning team. The members of the jury of experts, and here we're really talking about international experts, after spent hundreds of hours, unanimously decided that the winning team was the one made up by the Daoust architecture firm with Lisette Stecker. It's Daoust, Lestage, Lisette, and Stecker. So you will have understood that this is a Quebec team. But to the great surprise of everyone, the government rather decided instead to ignore the jury's decision and to give the contract to another team coming from Alberta and Ontario, a little contract of $3 million. So let's go back in time, if I may, Madam Speaker, to understand what has happened and how it happened. So the war in Afghanistan and the mission for Canada went to 2001 to 2014. It included Canadian Armed Forces, obviously, police officers and civilians. In August 2019, the Department of National Defense and Heritage launched a first step in the competition called the Request for Proposal in August 2020. They unveiled the 5 finalist teams that would put forth concepts for this monument. And now we'll jump forward in time. It's the end of May. Beginning of June, the government organized an online poll that was open to the public to get comments with regard to the 5 projects and the 5 designs that were on the table. So there was a press release published that the government is going to select the design, and this will be made public in the fall. So veterans and their families and Canadians are consulted before the competition and during the competition. There were concerns of the veterans that were taken in consideration to ensure an enlightened and free decision. So the jury of experts will was to determine the best project and would also take into consideration the results of the poll, as well as the comments by the technical committee. So the technical committee had 30% and the jury 70%. So the poll was a 90-second video with an idea of some of the projects. And to date, up to then, there was nothing to be said. There were precautions to ensure equality of the voices with regard to the concepts. In an email dated November 17th, 2021, with regard to the poll, we can see that from the beginning, consultations on this national monument to Canada's mission in Afghanistan were broad, but not preferential. All voices and opinions were considered to be equal, and it seems irregular for one group to have more weight in terms of the opinion than another. And this preferential treatment was never discussed during the development of the project. So in November 2021, the Department of Canadian Heritage and Veterans Affairs were advised of the jury's unanimous decision. The expert jury decided that the Daou group or firm won. They had one decision, and they all decided that it would be the Daou group that would win. Once again, we're talking about a group of experts. There were 7 members from across Canada, and they included 4 people who had a very close connection to Afghanistan. So 2 hours before the press conference, the Daou group and others were advised 2 hours before the press conference, the winning team was told that ultimately it was not the winner and that the national monument would be designed by a different group among the finalists. So what happened between November 2021 and June 2023 for the government to decide to overturn the jury's decision? I just need a drink of water. One moment. We know that in the winter of 2022, the Department of Canadian Heritage asked for a legal opinion in order to determine the risks. And in the documents that we received, the 400 pages, which we got last week, there is mention of the word risk. This is an admission of guilt, at least the initial admission. And the government offered a compensation to Daou group for loss of income, and we can understand that they won, and then their prize is being taken away. That is the right to create the national monument, and because they would therefore lose income because of the process that would not take place, they were offered a sum of money. A second admission of guilt from the government. Would you ask for a legal opinion and offer money to a team such as this if it had been a legitimate decision? I think the answer is quite simple. In the regulations of the competition, it states that the Department of Canadian Heritage, as the department responsible for the national monument on federal lands, as well as the Department of Veterans Affairs, would be jointly responsible for this concept that would be selected by the jury. And I repeat, the jury. So they were responsible to endorse the jury's selection, not to amend that choice, and even less so to overturn it. So acting like this would be going against the way that the government had set out the process. So how can the Department of Veterans Affairs justify this by first saying that they wanted to select a design that best reflected what was needed and picked what was popular for the veterans based on the online poll? Except I did a little analysis. It's a little given how big this file is. And this was, everyone knows Leger. It's the largest polling company in Canada, and so the government had polled about 10,000 people, and they confirmed that the results were biased and that it was a pseudo poll, and there was nothing that could be used from it. So there's no way to verify the identity of those who responded to the poll. We don't even know if there was a single woman who responded to the poll. In the emails that we obtained from the government over the past 2 weeks, the Department of Veterans Affairs knows full well that we cannot rely on the online polls. It says it so in black and white. The polls, and I quote, were designed to collect overall data and not to get segmented data. Demographic data cannot be separated out. Respondents said that they belong to a number of categories, for example, member of family, member of the public, etc. So we can understand that the poll does not represent in any way what veterans really think, and that it didn't represent much, unlike what the current Minister of Veterans Affairs has said a number of times. So that's one of the many reasons why they selected the Dow firm, because I would say that this concept best reflected the sacrifices made by Canadians who took part in the mission, and to ensure that their participation was not in vain. It reflected education and the education of women in Afghanistan and young women in Afghanistan. It wasn't about going to war. We were supporting and helping the Afghan people. And the reasons given by the government to justify not going with the firm selected does not make any sense. So what's the reason that it did this? Why did it do that? Why did the government say that it wouldn't be the winning team, but rather the Stimson team?
We can all agree that it's easy to understand that the decision came from above. There was meddling. There was interference with this decision. Currently, there is no other credible explanation than that. Now, when I asked questions of the department and I asked questions of the Minister for Veterans Affairs, I asked if the decision came from her department or from the PMO. And she said, I quote, "The decision was made by our government." She was not certain whether the Prime Minister's office had intervened. She said that she would follow up. That wasn't very reassuring. Then I asked the same question again in Veterans Affairs Committee. The answer was different. The answer was that the decision to go with Stimson and not Dow was a decision made by the Department of Veterans Affairs. All right, fine. That's her decision to say that it was the department's decision. Then the Canadian Heritage Minister, Minister Saint-Onge, tried to say that it was the Department of Veterans Affairs that was in charge of the project. Though we all know that the project was led by both departments together, Heritage and Veterans Affairs. But through access to information requests, we obtained documents saying that the Department of Veterans Affairs needed the signature of the Heritage Minister in order to decide not to go with Dow. So the two ministers kept punting the responsibility over to each other, and they continue to do so. According to the Heritage Minister, the decision was made in May 2023. So this decision-making process went from November 2021 through to May 2023. Why was the jury and why was Dow only informed just 2 hours before the official announcement was made? It was done so that they wouldn't be able to react. They were presented with a done deal, a fact, that they weren't given a chance to respond to. So we called in witnesses to the Veterans Affairs Committee. all of whom are specialists in public art and architecture. We heard from Jean-Pierre Suvet. He is the Research Chair of Canada in Architecture, and he's from the University of Montreal. Truly an expert. He confirmed, listen to this, he said that it would be a first in the history of Canada to not retain the jury's choice of a firm, to go, in fact, with another firm. He said it would be a first in Canadian history. It had never occurred before, never. He referred to 500 contests. 500 contests he was aware of. All studies show that in order to judge the complexity of projects for buildings and public monuments, a vote among the people, will never be a reliable, equitable, fair, and transparent process, not as fair and transparent as a well-organized contest with a jury. A jury for a public contest is like a court jury. They represent a variety of interests, and they do so thoroughly. I'll just have a sip of water here. Another witness, François Lemoine. He's a lawyer who specializes in arts law, and he's a true expert in domain and everything to do with copyright and public buildings and heritage buildings. He said, I quote, "The government, under the rules of this contest, simply did not have the discretion to grant the contract to a team which had not been selected by the jury. The jury has the decision-making power, not a minister and not a prime minister. If the withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 truly was a game changer, as the Minister for Veterans Affairs claimed, well, in that case, then there was only one choice, denouement. In the decision-making tree that the government gave us, it was very clear that the jury's selection should be chosen. If not, then the contest must be launched again. In the documents which were tabled for bidders, there was no possible third voice or third option. And this same Mr. Lemoine, lawyer, said the only solution open to the government would have been to cancel that contest and launch a new contest. But that was never discussed in the 400 pages of documents we received. That possibility was never explored, the possibility of a new contest. He said, this lawyer, that it goes beyond the matter of public art. But what is at issue is the integrity in granting of public contracts and the integrity of the government itself. This is a political system, in any political system based on the rule of law. Governments must follow the rules. So the government set out credible, legitimate rules which absolutely matched the process that we should follow for public tendering for public art, especially for a project of this scope. But it was requested that discussions between the Prime Minister's office and departments be published. We received the 4 pages of documents I've mentioned, and, surprise, there were dozens upon dozens of redacted pages, all blacked out. But there was an interesting element that they may have forgotten to redact. In email exchanges with the PMO, the PMO asked to have a meeting with Couture about the monument. So a meeting with all key stakeholders. In June 2022, Couture had a meeting with the PMO, asking if things were moving along. The PMO, yes, the PMO, that is who was involved in these meetings, and that's in the documents. The two ministers refused to mention the PMO and its involvement when they testified in committee. But the PMO was absolutely involved, and we have proof of that in the documents we received. The Prime Minister intervened in that process and then pressured two departments to find out how things were moving along. So maybe the ministers and the departments tried to hide the PMO's interference. Why? Is it because the decision to cast off Daou and go with Stimson was a PMO decision? That's what the non-redacted part of the documents seems to suggest. Mr. Speaker, we have many unanswered questions, but the most important one, in my view, is why did the Prime Minister's office decide to intervene in this contest? Why did the ministers lie to us and say they decided to give more credence to the polls because of the situation in Afghanistan? While, Madam Speaker, do I not have much time remaining? I would like to remind the member that the member should not suggest that someone has lied in the House of Commons, so I wanted to mention that. The honourable member, I'm sure that the member has a lot more to say, but he can perhaps speak more during questions and comments. Questions and comments.
Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I think the most important thing to recognize is the sacrifices of many in support of our allied forces and having a monument. And I'm wondering if the member can provide his thoughts and maybe his comments and recognition of those lives that were lost and those that actually served. Madam Speaker, I think that's an important thing to recognize right offhand. And then, if the member doesn't mind, just to provide his thoughts in regards to what degree the committee actually had the minister, I understand, I'm not sure, attend the committee and provide an explanation or an answer to the member's question.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you for the question. I like the question a lot. Here's why. Canada went to fight in Afghanistan for democracy. For democracy. This whole contest, though, is undemocratic, anti-democratic.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments.
Comments, the Honourable Member for Banff Airdrie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I listened with interest to the member's speech. Of course, I sit on the committee as well. I share many of his concerns that he has raised here today. In particular, two things. First of all, this is such an important monument for those who served in Afghanistan, and this is being delayed by this bungling of the government. And most importantly, being delayed by the fact that the PMO has gotten involved in this situation, interfered in this situation. He indicated that in his speech. And I would like to just ask him, his thoughts and his feelings around the fact that the PMO interfered and is therefore delaying this monument from being able to be built. But if he could indicate to us why he believes the PMO interfered in this matter inappropriately.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. I thank my colleague for the question. Yes, it is dragging on. The process was very long, but I tried to describe the sequence of events, but the sequence of events could have been shortened. But at some point, there was a breakdown in the decision-making process. I am more or less convinced that the two ministers and the two departments wanted it to be Daou. But there was a breakdown, and the breakdown meant that time was lost, and the Prime Minister's office gave itself the authority to make that decision. which, I must repeat, had never been done before in public art contests in Canada, and which will have major consequences, not just for the credibility of this government, but for all those who will one day want to bid for public art contracts.
Island Power River.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for bringing this to the House today. I know that him and I sit in committee together and share similar concerns on these issues. My question specifically is around the fact that this is not the first time that we have seen the department be very unclear in the process of communicating the facts and information. And in fact, they were saying that they reached out to veterans, but everything was done in a way that it wasn't measurable to make sure that those were in fact the veterans and those were in fact the family members. So I'm just wondering if this member could talk about methods that this department might take on to actually talk to those veterans, like in this one in specific, the Afghan veterans and their loved ones.
L'honorable député de Rivière-des-Mille.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille. Well, in the current case, they attempted to consult. There was an attempt at consultation, but as you know, the poll wasn't even a poll. Léger was very clear about that. It was absolutely unusable. It's really sad. It would have been nice to truly have the opinions of veterans or of those who participated in the mission over there. So if there are rules, the rules should be followed. And if in the rules a poll is called for, it should be a properly conducted poll rather than a botched one. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you, Madam Speaker, here is my question for my colleague. My colleague has done a lot of work on this file, excellent work. He has been searching for the truth because there have been undescribable errors. My colleague ran out of time during his remarks, so I would like to know, in fact, what he would conclude. So I'd like to ask my dear colleague what he would like to leave us with. What final thoughts? The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's a horrible, horrible mistake. Some people are even calling it the shame monument. That hurts me. That cuts deep because this is a monument for those who worked in Afghanistan. There's only one solution. Only one. The government must take back its decision. Yes, that's what I said. Take back its decision. And the government must give the contract to the Daou firm. That's the only way out of this. And the government should do so as soon as possible. Because these are Canadian works of art in Europe and in the United States. And our allies are looking at us and wondering how a democratic country such as ours could have such an error. Thank you. Questions and comments?
For Yorkville-Melville.
Yorkville-Melville. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I apologize for not being in the House in time to hear the full speech of my colleague. However, I sit next to him in committee, and I'm very aware of the circumstances here. I would like to ask him what he sees as the ripple effect of this decision by the government in impacting future procurement opportunities.
Honorable député de Rivière-des-Mille.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille. Well, on two levels. First, the government's credibility. I must repeat that. The government implemented a process which was fine and fair, but then did not follow it, did not follow its own process. So how are we supposed to trust the government? The government decides to flip-flop whenever it feels like it. Nothing sticks. There's a trip abroad, then an issue, then another trip abroad. And there's another element, the second level, is Canada's credibility abroad among our partners. And especially when it comes to artists. Canada's artists community is mobilized on this issue. Daou has received thousands of signatures from people who are deeply offended. You can't do that. You can't proceed this way. Public art's being disrespected, architects are being disrespected, designers are being disrespected, and so on and so forth. Thank you. Questions and comments? The honourable member for, just a moment, I'm forgetting the riding name, Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our veterans fought not only for democracy, but also for justice, fairness, and equality. Our veterans have fought so that rules that are not always followed could be followed, nationally and abroad. So the situation described in the report and the situation that my colleague described in his speech, do those match the values that our veterans fought for and continue to fight for? The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles in just over a minute. Well, of course not. It's a mismatch. We're referring to military personnel and veterans, all those who participated in the mission. They have values, just like any of us. They value fairness, respect, solidarity. But with the government's decision, there's none of that, none of those values. And there's something quite obvious that I must mention. I've received a host of phone calls, like many of my fellow committee members, calls during which I've been told that they feel like they're being used with that sham, phony poll. They feel like they're being used so that the government can say that this is what we want as a monument. And I'm not criticizing the monument, Madam Speaker, but a decision was made by experts, by the expert jury. The government is not a public art expert, nor am I. But this jury was made up of public art experts. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And just to pick up on the member's concluding thoughts in terms of the government not necessarily being an expert, and I think it's safe to say that is in fact the situation when you have a government that is very much consulting with Canadians on the whole issue of the monument and the conceptual design of that particular monument. And I think what's important here to recognize is that we're not talking about hundreds, we're talking about thousands of people that have provided input, and the ones that we need to be very sensitive to are in fact the veterans and family members of the veterans. And I do believe that the decision that has been made has been weighted in that favor. And I think that's an important aspect to recognize. But before I go into more of the details, Madam Speaker, what I'd like to be able to do is to put things into a proper perspective. It would be wrong for me not to recognize that I don't necessarily agree with the timing of the debate itself and the decision of the bloc to use a concurrence motion in order to raise the issue, given that we are now talking days left of the session and there's so much that still needs to be done under the government agenda. So, for example, many members that would have come to the House today would have been thinking in terms of the affordability bill legislation, C-56, I think is what it is, Madam Speaker, that was supposed to be debated at this point in time. I know that members are very much wanting, at least on the government benches, to hear debates and discussions on that issue, because those are the issues that Canadians are facing today, Madam Speaker. They're looking for to the government and for responsible opposition parties to recognize that the issues of affordability and this legislation that we were supposed to be debating today, I would suggest to you, should have been allowed to continue the debate. And so I'm a little bit disappointed and somewhat surprised that the Bloc would have used this particular opportunity to raise this specific issue. When the Bloc do have other opportunities to do it, Madam Speaker. Even given the discretion that is often used in terms of relevancy to legislation, the member could have raised the issue that he's raising right now in the fall economic statement, not to mention even this legislation. You probably could have found a way to raise that issue, or to make the suggestion of a take note debate, or to wait until there's an opposition day opportunity. In other words, Madam Speaker, I would suggest that there would have been other ways. Now, it's not to underestimate the importance of the issue. Madam Speaker, as a bit of a background, prior to getting involved in politics, I served in the Canadian Forces. I had the privilege to walk and march, I should say, side by side with World War II veterans. I've had the opportunity to visit the legions with many veterans, Madam Speaker, especially when I was a member of the Canadian Forces, serving both in Alberta and doing my training in Ontario, and a portion of it in Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker. And you gain a very genuine appreciation of the horrors of war when you see people in the legions that have had the odd drink, if I can put it that way, Mr. Speaker, where they'll, in tears, try to get through the Remembrance Day. And, there have been many different awkward moments where discussions have become very emotional, because even though the actions of the war were decades prior, to talk about it, to relive it, would bring tears along with a wide spectrum of emotions. And it wasn't necessarily those that fought on those front lines. You could even see it at times with family members. And I appreciated every opportunity I had, especially while I was in the military, Mr. Speaker, in having those talks and expressing my gratitude and appreciation to those that return from war abroad, Mr. Speaker. I understand and I value the importance of war monuments. And it is important that we never, ever forget, Mr. Speaker. Like members across the way, on November 11, I too participate in recognizing the sacrifices that have been made in order for us to be here. I can recall an incident when I was serving inside the Manitoba legislature, where we had veterans on the floor of the Manitoba legislature. And I remember very distinctly being able to sit in my chair in a chamber of democracy, where I could actually turn my chair around, because it was on a pivot, and I could actually touch the knees of war veterans. I find that is profound, much like when we get veterans that come to the chamber here and sit in our galleries. It is very touching, Mr. Speaker, because it speaks volumes in terms of the sacrifices that have actually been made so that we can do the things that we do, and we can have a society based on freedom and liberty and operate on rule of law. We have been blessed by the many men and women that have served our country, that have served in the Allied forces, and have ensured that we have the benefits of what we have today as a direct result of those efforts. and those sacrifices. And it is important that we recognize that. Mr. Speaker, that's one of the reasons why I do find it difficult to say that we could have had this debate at another time. And I still believe, having said what I have said, that we could have, Mr. Speaker, because of where we are at in regards to the session. And there's, I believe, a lot more that we could be doing and saying in dealing with our veterans. I have known, as a member of Parliament, many issues that have come to the veterans' files. When I was in opposition, we opposed, for example, the number of veterans offices that were being shut down across the country. Many members at the time raised questions on that issue and challenged the government of the day as to why it is that they would be closing down offices. There has been concerns in regards to how it is that services are being provided to our veterans, Mr. Speaker, in a very real and tangible way. And again, what we've seen over the last number of years is a great deal of attention focused on Canadian veterans. Whether it is the reopening of the veterans offices that were shut down by the previous government, or it's reinvesting and topping off hundreds of millions of dollars in many ways to support our veterans, Madam Speaker. And we do that in different ways. Whether it's direct in terms of financial compensation, Madam Speaker, where we have seen overall budget increases, to the services that are provided, Madam Speaker. We also recognize, as previous governments have, that we need to do what we can to support veterans when they come home. Veterans in particular that have had some of those, what I classify the horrors of war, come and return, and the impact that that has on them. I think General Dallaire, a former senator, highlighted many things for Canadians. Whether it is...
I have un appel au règlement.
Point of order. The honourable member for Rivière-des-Belles-Îles. With all due respect for my colleague, he has 20 minutes to talk in the House, and he hasn't talked about the commemorative memorial. Could he at least explain his position? Is he comfortable with the survey? Is he comfortable with the position of the two governments? Should his government... It seems there'll be a question and comments period, as the member knows well. There is some flexibility during speeches. And yes, I'd like to remind all members that when you do a speech, there is some flexibility, but you also must specifically talk about the issue that is before the House. On, in this case, report 13. So, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, I'm sure he will bring his speech back to the motion. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, and at the beginning of my comments, I made reference to the fact of monuments, and that I was going to be giving some background as to the importance of monuments. And I am going to be talking about monuments. Even in the question that I put forward to the member, I highlighted that when we talk about monuments, what we're talking about, I believe, is something that's well worth the expenditures that government is actually making towards it. and providing the background information as to why it's so important, Madam Speaker. Why it's so important that we support our veterans. I don't understand why the member from the bloc would not recognize the relevancy to everything that I've said. And it's a bit offensive that the member wouldn't recognize that, Madam Speaker. At the end of the day, as a government, we need to appreciate and value the sacrifices by many that have enabled us to have the privileges that we have today. And a part of that, Madam Speaker, I have been listing off. And if I circle back to the very beginning of my comments, it is in regards to monuments. And monuments take place in many different ways, Madam Speaker. You know, the member makes reference to, in the report, in the Afghanistan monument. Well, Madam Speaker, there is no doubt. I do believe that the people that we have to listen to the most are those that were the veterans and the family members of the veterans. And then I went in to explain why it is important that we listen. And that's, in fact, what has taken place, Madam Speaker. In fact, if I was to, the member has raised the question. He's raised it earlier this month. And he received a response from the minister, Madam Speaker. Back on December the 4th, he posed the question, and the minister responded by, and I quote, "The creation of a national monument to Canada's mission in Afghanistan will at last recognize the commitment of Canadians who served in that mission. The Department of Veterans Affairs conducted a survey or questionnaire. More than 12,000 Canadians, most of whom were veterans, responded to the survey. The Stimson concept was chosen because we were told that it better reflected the sacrifice, bravery, and loss of our veterans." The member was told that, Madam Speaker. He chooses not to believe that. And now I am attempting to explain to the member that why it is so important that we listen to what it is that the minister explained, member across the way. He might disagree with the member, and ultimately, Madam Speaker, that would be a dispute between the member and what it is that the minister has explained. I am providing a great deal more background as to why it's important, Madam Speaker, that we recognize and listen to what veterans are saying, and that's been what the entirety of my speech has been, Madam Speaker. I might sound a little bit offended because the fact that, as I said, at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, I like to think that I have listened to many veterans over the years. And Madam Speaker, I am now giving a clear indication as to what I believe veterans of today want. And that's why the opposition doesn't have the clue, Madam Speaker. Member from Abbotsford.
Order. I just want to remind members that if they want to make comments or have questions, that to wait until the appropriate time, and there should be no heckling while another member has the floor. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary has just a little over 4 minutes to finish up.
Madam Speaker, the member from Abbotsford says, well, I don't have any clue in regards to what veterans want. Let me remind the member from Abbotsford, when he was in Stephen Harper's government and sat around the cabinet table, he shut down 9 veterans' offices across Canada. And he says, I don't have a clue, Madam Speaker? I would suggest to you that members of the Conservative caucus don't have a clue in regards to what veterans want. This is a government.
Order. There still is some individuals who seem to want to contribute to the discussion. I would ask them to please wait. There will be opportunities, 10 minutes at that, for questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I have a point of order. The honourable member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And look, the parliamentary secretary is entitled to attack political parties, but when he attacks all members in this House, including within my party, when some of us are actually Afghanistan veterans, right. I take that personally, Madam Speaker.
Debate. It's not a point of order. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, I didn't participate in the Afghanistan, but we have had members on the Liberal government side that have participated, including the former Minister of Defence. The former Minister of Defence that reinstated the veterans' offices that were closed down by the member from Abbotsford in the Stephen Harper government, and at the time in which I opposed.
Order. Again, I want to remind there's a couple of members who have been repeatedly interrupting the honourable parliamentary secretary, and I will ask them to please wait until it's time for questions and comments, the appropriate time, should they wish to contribute to the discussion. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. What's important, and I see because my time's running out, I'll try to keep this as brief as I can, Madam Speaker. What is important to recognize is that monuments play a very important role for our entire society. And at the end of the day, recognizing that it does take time to do the consultation and to work with people in order to ensure that we get the right monument. And that is, in fact, what we are seeing with regards to Afghanistan, Madam Speaker. And I do believe, once it's all complete, that all of us will be proud of that particular monument, Madam Speaker. And I support the government's initiatives that we have taken to date to support our veterans and recognizing. You know, I like to, as someone that has served in the Canadian Forces for over 3 years, Madam Speaker, and has marched alongside World War II veterans and others, I always take the time to have a personal experience of reflection when it comes to November the 11th. A couple of years ago, I was actually in the city of Manila with the Mayor Honey, and we actually were at a monument where there were Canadian soldiers as a part of the Allied forces. So they weren't technically Canadian soldiers, but they were Canadians that participated in the Allied forces at a special monument in Manila, honoring Canadians. Whether it's there or in my own city of Winnipeg, at the Brooklyn Cemetery, or the armories, or in churches, or it's here in Ottawa, Peace Tower, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. There are many monuments that are scattered throughout. And being able to take the time to reflect and value those monuments and the sacrifices that ultimately had taken place that justified those monuments being put into place. I am a big fan and support us as a government or any government recognizing the contributions of veterans, Madam Speaker. And that was the purpose, and believing that the monument that's being proposed and will be put together and constructed for the Afghanistan, people that have served in Afghanistan, Madam Speaker, I believe is the appropriate one. And ultimately, I look forward to its completion and its dedication. With those few words, Madam Speaker, I'll conclude my remarks.
And comments, the honourable member Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When it comes to Veterans Affairs, when it comes to recognizing the ultimate sacrifice that many of our veterans and Canadian Forces personnel have made, in particular in Afghanistan, where we left 158 Canadian Armed Forces members behind, it should be nonpartisan. This process about recognizing the incredible contribution that these veterans have made to this country and to freedom in Afghanistan should be nonpartisan. However, what we have here is we have a government that took 8 years to actually come up with this so-called design. And again, I'm not actually criticizing the design that was selected. I'm criticizing how the government messed up the process and interfered in the process, and that's what this motion's all about, to actually make it so that veterans are being penalized once again and not being respected. And I just want to know, in the member's viewpoint, does he not think it should be proper to make this as non-politically as possible and to actually recognize the incredible contributions that our veterans have made?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I believe that it would be a wonderful thing to see it being done in an apolitical fashion. The problem that I have is that the member is pointing to the government, saying that it's the government that is messing up, when in fact that is just not the case. It is the opposition, and I won't say which opposition, that also plays a role. If you haven't noticed, the last number of years, it has been a minority government. Where is the opposition on the file, Mr. Speaker, the official opposition on this particular file? The member qualified his comments by saying, well, he gives the impression that he supports the one that the government has accepted. He didn't give clear indication. Does he support it or does he not? He is in Afghanistan. He served himself, and I appreciate and value his contributions to Afghanistan on behalf of Canadians. But he never did give his personal opinion.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's hard for me to believe that our Liberal colleague endorses a failure to respect law. The process is clear. The government set it out. It was great. They did not respect the rules. They decided to grant it to a team that did not win the competition. The government is acting as the judge and jury for artists. My colleague is endorsing once again a poll that has been demolished by the biggest polling firm in Canada. That's what my colleague is endorsing. He is endorsing the fact that they made a political decision that goes against anything that refers to art. He's talking about honoring veterans, but I think this is sad.
Madam Speaker, what I am supporting is when the minister makes this statement, and she's made this statement to the member across the way, and I quote, "The Department of Veterans Affairs conducted a survey or questionnaire. More than 12,000 Canadians, most of whom were veterans, responded to the survey. The Stimson concept was chosen because we were told that it better reflected the sacrifice, bravery, and loss of our veterans. That's the reason why the decision was made."
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for North Island Powell River.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just have to say that I do agree with my friend from Bruce Grey Owen Sound that this should be a nonpartisan issue. We know that the people who sacrificed for us in Afghanistan, not only did we lose them there, we lost them when they came home. So this really matters. So my question to the member is simply this. You know, during committee when the minister came, one of the things that I asked was how did they verify that the people who answered these surveys were veterans? What was the process of doing that? Now, I trust veterans, but perception matters. So we hope that it was the veterans and their families that made these voices and opinions heard, but there's actually no way of knowing that. So I think that's why this concern is here and it's very real. And I'm wondering if he could respond to that, knowing that the minister herself said that they did not do a process where they knew the people who answered the survey were veterans or not.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I have confidence in Canada's civil servants to ensure that there's a process that is reflective of being fair, and transparent. And the information that was gathered, I believe, is in fact accurate. There's been no indication whatsoever from any political party that there is some major fault in that consultation and feedback received by Canadians. I suspect, Madam Speaker, that what you will find is that out of those thousands and thousands of people that participated, most of which were veterans or family members of veterans, is a true reflection in terms of what we're going to be seeing as a monument. And unless there's evidence to demonstrate that there was something wrong, the civil servants or whoever applied the questionnaire/survey didn't know what they were doing, I would suggest that we accept it as we have done on many other policy points, I suspect.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Banff-Airdrie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask the member two things. First of all, if this government truly believes the words that he's saying, that they care so much about trying to ensure veterans are honored and appreciated, why did it take them 8 years just to announce a design of a monument? And then, most particularly, when the jury made a decision in November of 2021, it took them from then until June of 2023 to announce this. And in between there is all sorts of evidence of the Prime Minister's office interfering in this process to change the decision. No one knows why they wanted to change that decision, but maybe the member could shed some light today for us on why exactly they spent 8 years and a year and a half of the Prime Minister interfering and showing such disrespect for our veterans. Why did that happen? Why did the PMO interfere and show so much disrespect for our veterans?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, his colleague says that we should try to depoliticize, and at the end of the day, I think extending or having 8 years, as the member puts it, I do not believe that is the complete fact of the matter, Madam Speaker. At the end of the day, there's a great deal of discussion that had taken place. Yes, it didn't happen immediately after, and then there's a consultation process that takes place. I could level the same sort of criticism on many Canadian Forces projects that Stephen Harper never got off the ground and took 10 years. And the classic one would be the F-35. It took this government to actually get that one off the ground because the Conservative government previously spent over a decade trying to figure out that they needed to get a replacement.
Order. Members know full well that if they've had a chance to ask a question, they should listen to the answer, and even it may not be what they're looking for. However, if they have other follow-up questions or comments, they should wait until the appropriate time.
I have the time for a brief question. The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. At the beginning of his speech, the colleague spoke about the fact that the member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles could have talked about the report at a different time to get a response in a different way. And yet when I look at routine proceedings, there is a spot for tabling of committee reports. Even in the House, are we to stop respecting the rules of the House, the standing orders, because the government decides that is the way? Will they do a poll on that as well?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, I don't know that question is related, but I will, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I think that the member in herself has to answer to her constituents as to why the Bloc decide at times to coalesce or work with the Conservative Party in preventing government legislation from passing. We are supposed to be talking about the affordability legislation today, and the Bloc want to minimize the number of hours being debated on that particular issue, when in fact the issue that we're actually debating today, there are other ways in which it could have been brought up and addressed. So we'll have to agree to disagree. I'm on the side of supporting the issues that Canadians want us to be talking about, legislation that they want to see us passing.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member Banff-Airdrie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I will tell you that I will be sharing my time with the member for Charlesbourg Haute Saint Charles. Thank you.
And now, Madam Speaker, I'd like to get to the issue at hand. This Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, has infamously said they're asking for more than we can give when referring to our veterans. And that's been a source of great consternation for our veterans ever since that time. And this government has shown that disrespect in so many other ways. But that comment sums it up exactly how the Prime Minister feels about our veterans and their sacrifices and their service. And I think this issue that we're speaking about today, at hand today, is just another example of that absolute disrespect from this government and from this Prime Minister to our veterans and to the families of those who've served. When you think about the delays in this monument, this government took 8 years just to announce a design for a monument to those who served in Afghanistan. And not only did it take 8 years to do that, but it bungled it so badly that now nobody knows when this thing will ever actually be built. Because you've got a design firm that was chosen to build this monument by the jury that the government selected and with the process that the government set up. And that was decided in November of 2021. But then in the next more than a year and a half, up to June of 2023, June of this year, the government spent all of that time trying to figure out how to disregard the decision of that jury. No one knows why they want to do that. You know, is this another typical Liberals trying to find a way to award a contract to their friend? Is this something else? No one knows. But we do know is that the Prime Minister's office interfered in that process in that period of time, in that year and a half. There's all sorts of evidence that that occurred. And nobody in this government will answer to that. They won't explain the reasons for this. They claim that there was this survey that, you know, that they heard from veterans, and it's been already indicated in this House that there's no way to verify that there was actually veterans they were hearing from. But most importantly, in the original talking points that this government had about this when they were planning to announce it back in 2021, they were indicating why they felt that it was important to follow the jury's decision above that of this survey. And now they're using this survey as their reason for it. So everyone knows that's not the truth. That is not the reason that they are not proceeding with the monument that was originally chosen by the jury. No one knows why, but we do know the Prime Minister's office interfered and therefore has disrespected all of those who served this country during the Afghanistan mission. They've disrespected and dishonored the memory of the 158 Canadians who laid down their lives. They've disrespected the families of the fallen and all of those who served this country by delaying this monument for that period of time and by putting this cloud over it and by leaving us in a situation where no one knows when the heck this thing will ever be built. Those who served this country in Afghanistan deserve that monument, and they deserve it now, and they deserve better than what they're getting from this government. So just to speak again to that timeline, you know, this government spent the period of time from when they were elected in 2015 until November of 2021 just to have this process that they set up arrive at a decision. That process arrived at a decision in November of 2021. And then in the next year and a half, with all sorts of interference from the Prime Minister's office, they fumbled around to try to figure out and tripped over themselves to try to figure out a way to change the decision of that jury. That's something, as was mentioned by the block member who brought forward the concurrence motion today, It's never been done before. Not only has it never been done before in Canada, but there's no precedent anywhere in the world for this sort of thing. When these types of jury processes are set up, this is the first time that anyone can ever speak to that this has occurred, that this jury process has ever been disregarded like this.
Shame.
And nobody knows why, except for the Prime Minister and probably a few other people. Now I'll note, Speaker, you know, obviously we cannot refer to the presence or absence of members in the House, but there is one person who could have stood up when the Liberal member got up to give a speech today, and that's the former Minister of Veterans Affairs, the current Minister of Agriculture. Now, I can't refer to whether he was present or not, but he could have stood up, and he could have clarified the situation, because I'm sure he was told what to do by the Prime Minister's office. So he could have told us why it was the Prime Minister's office told him that he needed to disregard the jury process and mire this project in such controversy that now we know no one knows when the heck it'll ever be built. He could have stood up and clarified that for us, but no, instead we had the Liberal Parliamentary Secretary who always stands up and just spout out a bunch of drivel. He didn't speak to what happened, why it happened. I mean, he gave us the typical talking point we've gotten, that's the justification that we all know is false, that we all know isn't the truth. But that's all we got from that member. We could have had clarification on what exactly happened. Maybe there was a good reason, but if there was, you would think that in the last 2 years, somebody from the government would have provided that justification. So we can only assume that their reasons are not something that they want to divulge to Canadians, and that would mean that there's something fishy going on here. And that's at the expense of our veterans. That is at the expense of our veterans. That's at the expense of the 158 Canadians who gave their lives in Afghanistan. That's at the expense of their families who mourn them, who grieve. And imagine what they must feel like to be witnessing what this government is doing. I think it's the least that anyone who serves this country could expect is a monument to the mission that they served in, a monument to the lives that were given in service of this country. That's the very least anyone could expect. And this government isn't even willing to provide that without getting some kind of political interference involved and therefore delaying and who knows for how long delaying this project. They can't even answer as to when this thing will be built right now because of the controversy that's now been created. And so one would have hoped that today might have been the day when the government realized the error of its ways. They were given the opportunity today through this motion to stand up and clarify the situation. The former Minister of Veterans Affairs could have stood up in his place and told us what happened. And maybe could have even better, could have stood up and told us, you know what, we were wrong. And we'll do better. And we'll do right by our veterans. We'll do right by those 158 Canadians who gave their lives. We'll do right by their families who were left behind to mourn them. But did we get any of that? No, we certainly didn't, Madam Speaker. Far from it, in fact. What we got instead was more disrespect for those veterans, more disrespect for their families, more disrespect for those who serve this country. It's shameful, Madam Speaker. It's absolutely shameful. This monument has been delayed now for 8 years by this government, and who knows for how much longer it will be delayed. And all for what? No one knows. No one knows except for the Prime Minister's office. Why did they interfere in this process? And why did they delay this? And why did they disrespect our veterans who serve this country? Why did they disrespect those who gave their lives for this country? Why did they disrespect the families of those who have fallen? No one knows, Madam Speaker, but I wished the Liberal government would just stand up and say, we were wrong, we shouldn't have disrespected our veterans in this way, and we're going to fix it. I really hope that maybe at some point in this debate that will still happen, Madam Speaker, because that's what our veterans deserve. That and nothing less.
Comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me tell you something about disrespectful and shameful. In 2014, the Conservative Party of Canada in government announces through a press release, we have a site for the monument. Didn't consult one veteran, not one veteran. It comes out in the form of a press release. Contrast that to what we have done. Thousands, well over 10,000 people, most of which were veterans or family members of veterans that were consulted and ultimately led to the monument that has been selected. I'll compare our record to Harper's record anytime. The one that consistently hits down our veterans is the party across the way, Madam Speaker. He's the one that should be feeling ashamed of himself.
The Honourable Member for Banff Airdrie.
That member stands up and says he's proud of their record.
Shame.
He's proud of a government that says to veterans, you're asking for more than we can give. He's proud of a government that spent 8 years to announce a design, just to announce a design. And then they bungled it so badly, and there was so much interference from the PMO that now it's mired in controversy. It'll probably end up in court. And the veterans in this country are left wondering, when will they have the monument they deserve? The families of the 158 fallen are left wondering, when will they have the monument that their loved ones deserve? He's proud of that? I'll tell you what, he should be absolutely ashamed.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his speech. I'm still struggling to understand that the Liberals' media line is similar. So they're referring to a survey that is a complete sham. Are they telling us that Léger isn't credible? I don't understand. But I'd like to hear my colleague on something. We asked to have the former Minister of Veterans Affairs and the former Heritage Minister in committee. But at our latest committee meeting, we heard that they were refusing to testify. How does my colleague feel about that?
Well, that is, the member is absolutely correct. We know that the Minister of Veterans Affairs and the Minister of Canadian Heritage at the time, they would have some knowledge of what exactly occurred. Now, we know the Prime Minister's office interfered. The Prime Minister's office likely directed them on what they were supposed to do. But they could have come to committee and clarified that for us. If there was a good reason why they needed to change the design of the monument, why that year-and-a-half extra delay needed to occur, and why they needed to leave this mired in controversy, one would have thought that the ministers would have gladly come and clarified what that good reason was. But they won't even admit who made the decision, let alone come and clarify their reasons for it. Once again, more disrespect to our veterans, more disrespect to the 158 Canadians who gave their lives in Afghanistan, more disrespect to the families who mourn them. That is shameful, Madam Speaker.
We have time for a brief question. The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his intervention. I have some concerns about this. We know very clearly, based on the testimony from the minister herself, that this was never verified, that it was actually veterans answering those calls. So I'm just wondering if the member could talk about how we need to talk to veterans a little bit more inclusively and maybe reflect on the fact that during the Conservative time of government, we heard very similar concerns that veterans were being disrespected and not listened to. So what would he think should be different, and why should veterans believe the Conservatives when they've repeatedly betrayed veterans as well?
Brief answer from the Honourable Member for Banff Airdrie.
Certainly. What we're talking about here today is a situation where a Prime Minister who has told veterans that they're asking for more than we can give delayed a monument for 8 years. And I absolutely agree with the member that it's critically important that we listen to our veterans. And I have served as our party's critic for Veterans Affairs, and that's exactly what I've done. I've listened to veterans and I'm hearing what they need, and they're not receiving it from this current Liberal government, and a Conservative government will bring that home for our veterans.
Reprise de débat. L'honorable député de Charlebourg.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This morning, unfortunately, I rise to speak again about an unfortunate situation which, very unfortunately, occurs too often in this country. After 8 years of this government, it's apparent that there's a lack of respect for everything related to the institution generally speaking, the institution of the House of Commons, the institution of departments of the Government of Canada, and more specifically today, as relates to the commemorative monument to Canada's participation in Afghanistan. There was a political decision in this file. So there will be a monument. It will be built. We don't know when, though. A monument to honor and commemorate the 158 fallen in Afghanistan and all civilians and all those who participated in the war effort. This monument will represent the decline of our country when it comes to the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans, and civil society. In this file, what the Liberals have done is order a sham léger poll. It's disrespectful to veterans, and they've done all this to justify a political decision, purely political decision. And why did they make this decision? Even though there was a process in place, and it was a professional process, there was a jury made up of professionals, and those professionals had heard the opinions of veterans. They took into account the results of the pseudo poll. Then, at the end of that process, the Liberal government took a purely political decision, which it is unable to justify. The only justification the government seems to be able to come up with is the pseudo survey, the pseudo poll. What occurred between the PMO, the former Veterans Affairs Minister, and the former Canadian Heritage Minister? What happened that they all decided to throw out the jury's decision and make a different decision, go in a different route? So what happened? Because, you know, Madam Speaker, this is the first time in Canadian history that a professional process implemented by the government has been cast aside by that same government. And in fact, the very day that the winner of the competition was announced, that very day, Daou was informed, well, your firm won the competition, but we're going to go with another firm. And that was a political decision. So what went on in the PMO, between the PMO and the Department of Veterans Affairs? And still today, we don't really understand what occurred. There's an issue that my Bloc Québécois colleague, the member for Rivière-des-Mille, brought up, and I thank him for that. This is a Québécois company. Lucas Fortin, who works for the firm, he's a Québécois artist. They won the competition. And what's worse is that the Canadian Heritage Minister, the former one, is from Montreal. The current Canadian Heritage Minister is a Quebecer, but they didn't do their work. Between the PMO and the Department of Veterans Affairs. And still today, we don't really understand what occurred. There's an issue that my Bloc Québécois colleague, the member for Rivière-des-Mille, brought up, and I thank him for that. This is a Québécois company. Lucas Fortin, who works for the firm, he's a Québécois artist. They won the competition. And what's worse is that the Canadian Heritage Minister, the former one, is from Montreal. The current Canadian Heritage Minister is a Quebecer. But they didn't do their work. They didn't do their job. The former Canadian Heritage Minister authorized this change of firm without asking any questions. He seemed to be totally okay with it. And the new minister, I asked the new minister questions, the new minister for Veterans Affairs. She had not an inkling about the file, even though the two departments are supposed to share this responsibility for Canadian heritage monuments. So there's been a total breakdown in departmental responsibility. These departments and these ministers disregarded the professional process that had been implemented, and the process was established in order to ensure that there would be a jury made up of experts who are competent to make this type of decision. There were interviews on the radio, for instance, and on the radio, experts were saying that this decision was political only and made no sense. It was illogical. On the other hand, Madam Speaker, we've done everything to insist about this. And I'd like to come back to what I was saying earlier. This purely political-only decision shows yet again that the Liberal government has no respect for institutions. The Liberal government likes to do things its way by skirting the rules. That's in their DNA. Skirting the rules. They set up a process, they set up some rules, and then they cherry pick, they pick and choose. We like to do things our own way. All right. But they are using veterans to justify their decision. And in the veteran community and in the armed forces community, people are sick of it. They're sick of this government that disrespects institutions, because respect is the first thing that veterans and military personnel want. And what that means is respecting decisions and making proper decisions, not making decisions willy-nilly based on nothing. Those who are above, making decisions above and the highest ranks, sometimes they change their mind, and then these decisions trickle down to the lowest levels. And at the lowest levels, among our troops, our soldiers, our military personnel, our veterans, they have no trust, no confidence in this government. And if the decision about the monument is not changed, then it will be, in fact, a testimony of these 8 years of Liberal governments. My colleague was in Afghanistan. 40,000 Canadians took part in the mission in Afghanistan. But if the government doesn't reverse its decision, then it will speak loud and clear about the style of this Liberal government over the past 8 years. And what's this debate today about? Is it about whether we personally prefer the Stimson Monument or the Dow Monument or one of the two other monuments that was proposed? No, what this is about is that the government implemented a decision-making process and then skirted it. We need our government institutions to be respected. What is an institution, Madam Speaker? An institution has principles and rules which must be respected, and currently they're being disrespected. Institutions and rules are being totally avoided, and now there's been a political-only decision based on what? Based on a pseudo poll. Now, back to this poll. I'll tell you what Léger said. This methodology shows that the online consultation is not legitimate and does not represent the opinions of the Canadian Armed Forces or of the Canadian population. The results of the online poll cannot be generalized to the Canadian population and should not be considered as objective enough to be used to select the commemorative monument for Canada's participation in Afghanistan. Léger is the most widely respected Canadian poll firm, and they themselves say that the survey is not legitimate, that the poll was not legitimate. So there was a purely political decision to disregard the jury's selection in order to go with the Stimson Monument. These decisions impact all Canadians, but the government is way off the mark. The government has forgotten the basics, which is respecting Canadians, respecting the troops, respecting the Canadian Armed Forces. True respect, not sham liberal respect.
The government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, in 2014, the Conservative Party demonstrated no respect for veterans when they, in a press release, made their announcement in terms of the land allocation or the site location. Not one veteran. The other thing that we're being criticized is the number of years. They say 8 years. The Korean War monument took 40 years. That's 4 decades. Now, the Liberals ultimately did get it put into place. It took 4 decades, Madam Speaker. The Conservatives have no idea in regards to what it is that they're talking about. And if you base it on their past history, I'd give them a strawberry when it comes to, or a raspberry, I should say, when it comes to dealing with our veterans, because they have clearly demonstrated while they were in government a true lack of respect for veterans, and then they say that we're not doing the job, when in fact we reopened the office, we've invested hundreds of millions of additional dollars, and we get the job done when it comes to war monuments, Madam Speaker. That has been clearly demonstrated in the past.
Again, there seems to be some other individuals that want to participate in either responding or asking questions. I would ask them to wait till the appropriate time. L'honorable député de Charlebourg.
The honourable member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my colleague is trying to shift the responsibility. He's trying to depict Conservatives as a party that doesn't respect veterans. But during the war in Afghanistan, a Conservative government was there, was present, gave the troops the equipment they needed on the ground. The Conservative government changed things because we started out that mission on the wrong foot. But when the Conservatives took office, the first thing we did is bring pride to our military personnel on the ground to give them the equipment that they needed to fight a good fight. And now the Liberal government is in office. They need to respect these people. We supported these people during the war, and they need to support them now after the war. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I congratulate my colleague, the member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles, for his speech. He mentioned elements that I did not address during my speech, and it was very interesting. The Liberals continue to try to defend the indefensible. Here's what I'd like to hear his opinion on. There's been a massive blunder, a massive Liberal blunder. The Liberal government is making this monument a shame and controversy monument. Would my colleague agree that it's not too late for the government to change its decision, that it's not too late for the government to give Daou the contract? The honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles.
I'd like to thank my colleague. Yes, Madam Speaker, I think we're at a very crucial stage. It's not too late. We can still turn back. The government just has to show some humility and say this isn't a good thing. And the survey results weren't really what they were expecting. And they could go back. They've already done this in politics, I think. So this monument will be here for decades and centuries to come. So it's a very important decision. And we would support such a change. We have a time for a quick question.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask my colleague what he thinks, as a former constituent himself, veteran himself, rather, about the lack of respect shown by the Liberal government in this interference from the Prime Minister's office. The honourable member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles in less than 50 seconds. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I also like to thank him for his work as the critic. The use of veterans is what bothers me most in this file. Using a poor or sham survey, saying it's the decision of veterans is shameful. And as my colleague who was in Afghanistan said earlier in this debate, this should not be political. This mission was done on behalf of Canada, and we should all be proud of having a monument that would recognize our efforts in Afghanistan and not just reflect a purely political decision.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I first would like to start by letting this place know that I will be sharing my time with the member from London Fanshawe. So first of all, I just feel that it is absolutely critical to start this speech by recognizing the Afghan veterans for their tremendous service and a very hard process to go through. And I think it's also important to recognize the family, because we know the truth is when it comes to military, it's the members who serve, but it is also their families who serve. And I just want to recognize them and thank them so much for their service today as we start. As the Member of Parliament that represents the 19 Wing here in Comox, I also want to take an opportunity to thank them for their tremendous service. They've done a lot of incredible things for our region in the last while and for many years. And, you know, when they are needed, they show up to work. I remember, you know, spending some time with some of the search and rescue service members and talking to one particular woman in particular. And I talked to her about her ability to deal with situations like she dealt with, like jumping out into the water and how you do that when it seems so terrifying to me. And she said, we just train so that when we are called, we just do the work that needs to be done. So I think that really outlines the reality that people who serve this country, they work hard, they practice hard, and they prepare themselves to do things that the majority of us can never imagine doing. So here we are having this discussion today about a monument and the process that unfolded to have that monument. And I know that so many have been waiting for this monument to happen. They want a place in this country to go and acknowledge the history, to acknowledge their service, and to acknowledge those who never came home, and to acknowledge the loved ones who were left behind so often. And I think that what is very clear is that the process has been unclear. And we heard from the minister that there was not a clear awareness or understanding of how to connect to veterans directly. And I think of all of the situations, that's the one that concerns me the most. We need to see veterans who served in Afghanistan and their loved ones voices clear. And we keep hearing from the government, oh, that's what we're doing. This is about focusing on the people who served. But we know that the process that unfolded was not clear. We know that there was no verification process to assure that the people that were giving their opinions were in fact veterans and their loved ones. And this provides a perception that that wasn't done correctly. And that's very concerning to me. And I think when we look at how processes unfold, it is important that connection is made with veterans. And this is something from the department that we've heard again and again from veterans isn't being done effectively. So I think, for example, when services moved to the PCVRS for rehabilitation services for veterans, and how many veterans did not know that that was happening. They saw changes to their services and they didn't understand why. The intake process was long and they often were re-traumatized, having to share their stories again. We heard from folks that were providing rehabilitation services, in some cases for 40 years, who were excluded from the process. So it was just not clear. And part of the problem was the method was not explained to the service people, to the folks that are veterans, or to their families, which is very concerning. And you know, this is not how it should be for veterans. They should be getting the services they need. And in fact, what I have talked about in the Committee on Veterans Affairs repeatedly is the fact that we need to see veteran-centric services. So we hear again about, things like sanctuary trauma. And I think that's something we need to be taking really serious, Madam Speaker. Veterans who are trying to access supports and services from Veterans Affairs are feeling like they're being re-traumatized instead of being provided the services that they desperately need. Those things need to be addressed. And a lot of the training that we know that people are doing at Veterans Affairs, good people trying hard to do the work, is not as effective as it could be in making sure that there's an understanding of what people need, of what veterans need, and what their families need when they call. And of course, when I think about this, we've talked several times to the minister in our committee, and one of the things that I've brought up over the last 4 years since I've been serving in that role to the minister is, why isn't there direct contact, letters, phone calls, follow-ups? If this is a department that I would hope is focused on service delivery, then those things would be happening. And if that was the case, then right now we would not be sitting here having this debate, because there would be a clear process that would show that Afghan veterans and their loved ones gave the feedback and a decision was made respecting their rights. But we don't have that information. And we know that Leger has come out very clearly and said this was not a method that is clear. It's not consistent. So it becomes this thing we're going back and forth. And who's really hurting through this process is the members who served and their loved ones. And that concerns me greatly. So here we are, Madam Speaker, again, looking at this reality. We know that in the last Conservative government, veterans really struggled. They were really frustrated. Their offices were shut down. Access to services was becoming a bigger and bigger concern. I heard then about sanctuary trauma, heard from veterans that they were frustrated. They kept trying to get support and they couldn't. And so it just seems like what we're hearing in the House today is the Liberals and the Conservatives fighting about who was worse. And we're not talking about what needs to change for veterans so that that debate doesn't continue to happen. And, Madam Speaker, this brings me back as well to the fact that in my office, I keep hearing from survivors of veterans, mostly women, mostly in their late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, that are calling my office, and they are talking to me about the survivor's benefit. They are asking me about the fact that in 2019, this government made an announcement of $150 million that they would be getting out to these largely women who were rejected from getting a survivor's benefit because they married their husbands after 60, even though they cared for them in some cases for 20, 25, 30 years, they get absolutely nothing when their partner passes on. That $150 million was allocated. It was supposed to get out the door and start supporting those women, to respect the veterans who served our country, to respect the women who cared for them as they aged. And we still have not seen a single cent of that going out to those survivors. That was 4 years ago, and I'm still getting phone calls from these ladies who are struggling every day to make ends meet. They are seniors. They are going to their MPs. They are asking for help. They are asking when that money's coming out the door, and they don't know. And what do I hear from Veterans Affairs? They haven't figured out the process. So these women who cared for senior veterans, who helped them to the very end of their life, are getting $0, even though they sacrificed in support of the sacrifice that their partner made. So this is the challenge, Madam Speaker, is here we are again, seeing again and again and again this repeat of unclear process, not very good communication with veterans and their families. We see a department that may have good intentions, but somehow is missing the mark. And we need to see that better. We see sanctuary trauma, where veterans are coming forward talking about being traumatized, trying to access the service that they need. And of course, I know I only have about a minute left. It also reminds me of the fact that right now in committee, we are doing the largest study that this committee has ever done, and the first study that it's ever done on women veterans. And what we're hearing from women veterans is horrifying, and it repeats this pattern of them being left out, not being able to access the services that they need, not being acknowledged while they served of the health challenges, the mental health challenges they had. So when they get to Veterans Affairs, they have to prove the things that they went through. And there's no acceptance of the fact that when the Army and the military and the Air Force and the Navy opened up, they didn't have the processes in place to support women. We need to do better by veterans. They definitely deserve it because they served us so well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I did appreciate the question of concern that was raised by the member when I had given my remarks, and I'm interested in hearing her thoughts in regards to the process of how one can do verification when government, because it's not just Veterans Affairs, I think it applies in other areas, other forms of government, when government looks to get feedback from Canadians on a wide variety of different topics. Here we're talking about the important Afghanistan war monument, and there was a survey questionnaire that went out, and the feedback that we have received is that it was a majority of veterans and family members that actually responded to make up most of the 12,000 that were returned. Does she have some thoughts in regards to how it is government can validate those type of questionnaires or surveys that go out, not only for this department but other departments?
For North Island Powell River.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank the member for the question. The reality is I'm not a pollster, but I'm pretty darn sure that people who do that work would know exactly how to do it. And I think it is important and it's respectful to veterans to make sure that there is no perception that this might not be the case. That is my concern. I hope that those 12,000 folks that came forward and shared their thoughts and their opinions are veterans. The government keeps telling us that they're veterans, but there's actually no way to measure if they are veterans or not. And that is what is leading us down this path. So my advice would simply be, please be thoughtful in the process, ask experts to help you when you need it, and let's respect veterans as decisions are made.
And comments, the Honourable for Yorkton Millville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate this conversation that we've had today in the House, and we know that our veterans want to be supported and want to be valued. They respect protocol, good governance. They respect order. Valor and honor are really important to them. And here we have a circumstance where the government has usurped the role of the existing procurement process and used a survey or questionnaire that, as has been mentioned, cannot be verified. And this is deeply disturbing to our veterans to consider that possibly there are individuals who've responded as veterans who aren't veterans. And this is something that is very, very inappropriate in their world. So I would ask the member, can she confirm that these two things, usurping the role of that procurement process and using as an excuse a questionnaire that has no validity, is that what has undermined the trust and confidence in this government by our veterans on this case, and should they reverse this poor decision? Thank you.
The Honourable for North Island Powell River.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the member. We've spent many years together on committee, serving veterans in our roles, and I deeply respect her commitment to veterans. I can't say what the outcome should be, but what I do agree with is that it should be veteran-centric. So we need to go back. Obviously, this is unfortunate. Afghan veterans have been waiting for this to happen, and they have not seen it happen because of so many mistakes. So I hope that the government will roll back, do this right, and make sure that veterans are acknowledged for the important work that they've done in this monument.
Time for one brief question. L'Honorable Député de Rivière.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Belles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to hear my colleague, for whom I have great respect. I'd just like to know, does she believe in the conclusions of the Léger poll in terms of the government survey, that there's nothing really in it?
Our river.
Well, Madam Speaker, I thank the member so much for his intervention. And again, I've worked with him for many years in the committee, and I respect him deeply. I think that Leger was very clear, and I think it's unfortunate that the government did not do their homework to make sure that there was a verification process, to make sure that the people who were giving the input were either from serving veterans or veterans who served or their families. And so here we are in a place that there's more chaos when there should be something that we're all proud of in this country.
Resuming debate, the honourable for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I too am honoured to be able to stand in this place and represent the folks of London Fanshawe and to talk about the 13th report of the Veterans Affairs Committee. So that committee denounced the government's about-face and lack of respect for the rules in deciding not to award the design of the commemorative monument to a team linking the artist Luca Fortin and the architectural firm Daoust Letage Lizette Stecker, which won a competition conducted by the team of experts set up by the Liberal government itself. Now, I find this all very, I'm not saying surprising, but certainly concerning, that something that the government went ahead to do to try to honor veterans from the Afghanistan war is now backfiring so much and doing so much damage. And it's so important, this process to build such an important monument that would honor the 40,000 members of the Canadian Armed Forces. 158 Canadians died while serving in Afghanistan. This is an important process that needed to be followed, and that process was ignored. And I simply just don't understand why, after going through so much of that process to have that jury determine who the winner was as the artist for that design monument, to go through 8 years, that the government would do such an about face. Now, again, this is about honoring veterans in our communities, and I said it before. The honor that I have to serve people in London Fanshawe is incredible, and London as a community holds that commemoration of and honoring of what veterans have done for our community so highly. I think in terms of when we're talking about these monuments. In London, we have the Holy Roller, which is an 80-year-old tank from the Second World War, a Sherman tank that actually it needed a lot of repair. And it took several years. It took a lot of effort, but the community came together and worked on that restoration. And when it was revealed again, when they took it back to our downtown in Victoria Park, hundreds of people came out. And hundreds of people see that monument constantly when they go through Victoria Park, and they have that connection to what the sacrifice means, to what soldiers throughout Canadians' war history have fought for. And that's really, really important. I mean, I think about all the incredible veterans, too, that I've come to know over my term of service so far. And they are truly remarkable. In London Fanshawe, we have Parkwood Institute, which is a veterans hospital. And, throughout COVID, I haven't been able to visit like I had wanted to, but the doors have finally reopened. And we've been able to go back. And I actually got to go back for Remembrance Day this year. And the ceremonies that we partake in, that I have the honor to lay a wreath at, are part of that commemoration. And I think about incredible veterans that I have met in my career, like Pete Schuessler, who I spoke about in this house, actually. And Pete died recently in the last few years, but Pete was a retired chief warrant officer. He served in World War II. He served in England, France, Belgium, Holland. He re-enlisted after 1948 and served again for the Royal Canadian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. He served in Korea. He was a peacekeeper in the Middle East. He served with NATO in Germany. He received 16 honors and awards. He received the Order of Military Merit. He was knighted with the National Order of the Legion of Honor because he helped liberate France. Another incredible veteran in my community is George Beerchaud. George actually just celebrated his 100th birthday, and he was a member of the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. He was a second World War II vet. He was also awarded France's highest honor, that Legion of Honor. He was made a knight. These are the kinds of veterans in my community that I am so honored to know, but also that need to be commemorated, and they need to be treated with the respect that they ultimately deserve. And just in terms of speaking of respect, my colleague, the member for North Island Powell River, was just speaking, and she went into a great deal of detail about the survivor's benefit that this government was supposed to provide to, again, also try and honor the family members of veterans. Now, I come from a long line of members of Parliament, and my mother also had introduced a similar bill to C-221, which is what the member from North Island Powell River has introduced. And it's that gold digger clause. It's the removal of that, because right now, spouses who married veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces or of the RCMP who were over the age of 60 are now ineligible of receiving that survivor pension. And that forces mainly women, these family members who have supported veterans for a huge part of their lives, with nothing. They live in poverty. They struggle to get by. And don't they deserve the same kinds of respects that ultimately we are talking about here? And so I'm proud to support Bill C-221, and I can't understand, again, why numerous governments, both conservative and liberals, have denied mainly women these benefits, but they continue to do so. And again, that speaks to a disrespect for our veterans. It's perplexing to me why this government would specifically go out of its way to set up this competition, to have a jury select a specific artist, and then interfere in that process and completely do a 180 and choose somebody else. Now, I mean, I have a quote here from a University of Montreal professor, Dr. Chupin, who is the chair of the research, or the Canada Research Chair in Architecture, Competitions, and he told the committee, the Veterans Committee, that the uproar over the planned monument represents a turning point in the history of competitions in Canada, and that there is no precedent for the kind of government interference that took place to overrule the jury over seemingly a process that the government set up themselves. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'll also note that one of the people who is part of this outrage is former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour. Now, I had such an incredible honor of working as the NDP's defense critic while former Supreme Court Justice Arbour was ruling on sexual misconduct in the military. And so she's probably very familiar with such disappointment, I guess you could say, in this government. And I just say that at a time that we're seeing such recruitment and retention crisis within our military, at a time where these incredible women and men who give their entire lives and build careers to defend our country, see how we are now treating our veterans with such a breakdown of process, I can see why they continue to lose hope in wanting to volunteer and get into that service in the first place. Not to mention the sexual misconduct crisis, of course, that is raging through. This is an opportunity right now today, I think, for the government, and I do hope that they change their mind in this. And I know that I only have a few seconds to wrap it up, but this is an opportunity for this House, for the government, to change their minds, to honor veterans, to see what we need to see in terms of the commemoration through this memorial. And I certainly hope that the government does so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Colchester, Cumberland, Colchester.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for my colleague for intervention. You know, I just want to highlight a project that happened in Nova Scotia in my riding of Cumberland, Colchester. Military veterans with great input from those who served in Afghanistan were able to construct in 1 year, at a cost of about $37,000, a memorial which is very befitting to honor those 158 Canadians who died in service to our great country. You know, there's 3 families of Silver Cross families in my riding: the Mellish family, the Reed family, the Tedford family, that we see often, and it's an incredible honor that their loved ones are honored on this memorial. I'd like to also highlight, Madam Speaker, very sadly, that during the unveiling of this monument, there were no members from the Liberal Party there at all. And this is an affront to veterans. And the process which was messed up by this Liberal government is also an affront to veterans. But projects like this can get done with the will of great veterans who've served this country.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Well, and I appreciate the honourable member trying to stand up for things that are happening in his community. I know that I certainly have done that, and I've worked very, very hard to try and find supports for other institutions that are commemorating veterans in our community. I have the 427 Wing, who has actually just been awarded the Veterans Ombudsman Award for service to their community. I have the Victory Legion in London, who and all legions across the country, the incredible work that they do and the supports that they need from this federal government in terms of their places that the infrastructure that needs supports. This government can do a lot to support those institutions that help veterans in our communities.
Questions or comments?
The honourable member for Charlottetown.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech. This monument was the result of a process that involved a jury, and the jury chose a monument design that was done by Daou. At the same time, the Department of Veterans Affairs launched a massive consultation that included numerous veterans groups, and overwhelmingly the preference was for another project, one that was put forward by Stimson. I really appreciated during her speech how she cast light on the wonderful contributions of veterans in her community. What would those veterans say if the government had ignored their wishes and gone ahead with the jury selection?
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Well, it's my understanding, actually, that is being called into question in terms of who they can't ensure who was part of that survey. They can't ensure that veterans groups were, in fact, polled in the way that they're suggesting. And the fact, again, that the government set up an expert jury who had done that consultation as well and rejected the findings of that expert jury is extremely questionable.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have 2 quick questions to ask. First, does she believe that the Prime Minister's office is best placed to assess a work of art? Second question is this: to get out of this mess, we're calling it a monument. It's being called a controversial monument. Is there not a simple solution, which would be to respect the result? That is the decision of the jury. That's all.
For London Fanshawe.
And again, I thank the honourable member for his question and his work on this file. We had the opportunity to travel together to Dieppe, and that was a beautiful trip, beautiful commemoration. Yes, for the government to set up an expert jury, to have done the work, expert jury, and then to override it is beyond understanding. And ultimately, the government could go back to the findings of that expert jury and respect their wishes and respect their findings. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate.
La Chambre est-elle prête?
Is the House ready for the question?
La question.
The question is as follows. Mr. Desilets, seconded by Ms. Chabot, moves that the 13th report of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, presented on Thursday, November 9th, 2023, be concurred in.
If a member participating in person wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, we would request a recorded vote, please.
Conformément à l'article.
Pursuant to Standing Order 45, the division stands deferred until later this day at the end of the time provided for oral questions.
The House will now resume with the remaining business under routine proceedings. We are under the rubric motions. Orders of the day. Well, motions. Motions. Présentation de.
Presenting petitions.
L'honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to table a petition E-4648 signed by 9,202 individuals across Canada. This petition asks, in short, that the Governor-General's expenditures be reduced, as well as her salary, and suggests a number of ways to do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have two petitions to present to you today. The first is in regards to climate change on the Intergovernmental Panel's most recent report, indicating that we are feeling the impacts in Canada today with increased flooding, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. The petitioners call on the Government of Canada to move forward immediately with bold emissions caps for the oil and gas sectors that are comprehensive in scope and realistic in achieving the necessary targets for Canada to reduce its emissions by 2030. I also have a petition, Madam Speaker, and this comes from community members at the Kingston, Frontenac, and Lennox and Addington region, in particular Frontenac Secondary School. They are calling to the attention of the government that school food programs are recognized around the world as essential to health, well-being, and education of students. They indicate that in data from Statistics Canada 2022 indicates that 1 in 4 children in Canada live in food insecure households, and that Canada is the only G7 country that does not have a national food school food program. They are calling on the Government of Canada, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, and the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food to prioritize funding for a national school food program through Budget 2024 for implementation in schools by the fall of 2024. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The following questions will be answered today. Question 1803, 1808, 1814 to 1820, 1823, 1828, 1829, 1832 to 1835, and 1842 to 1845. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, if the government's responses to questions 1804 to 1807, 1809 to 1813, 1821, 1822, 1824 to 1827, 1830, 1831, 1836, 1837, 1839, 1841, 1846, and 1847 could be made orders for return. These returns would be tabled immediately, Madam Speaker.
He did all that last night.
Plaît-il à la Chambre que...
Is it the pleasure of the House for the questions mentioned be transformed into questions on the reports. Agreed?
Agreed and ordered.
Madam Speaker, finally.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Speaker.
And then finally, Madam Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time.
That makes sense given the word.
Agreed. Agreed. Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day.
Ordre émanant du gouvernement.
Government orders, government bills, commons. Consideration at report stage of C-56, Affordable Housing and Groceries Act.
There are 3 motions in amendment standing on the notice paper for the report stage of Bill C-56. Motions numbered 1 to 3 will be grouped for debate and voted upon according to the voting pattern available at the table.
I shall now propose motions numbered 1 to 3 to the House.
Motion number 1, Mr. Hallen, seconded by Mr. Epp, moves that Bill C-56 be amended by deleting Clause 1. Pursuant to Standing Order 76-12, notice also received from Mr. Sorry. Motion numéro 2.
Motion number 2, Mr. Williams, seconded by Mr. Epp, moves that Bill C-56 in Clause 3 be amended A, by replacing lines 26 and 27 on page 3 with the following. Quote 10.11, the Commissioner may conduct an inquiry into the state of competition. B, by replacing line 30 on page 3 to line 6 on page 4 with the following. The come.
Motion number 3. Mrs. Gould, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. Mrs. Gould for Mr. Champagne, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez, moves that Bill C-56 be amended by adding, after line 16 on page 8, the following. Disposition de
Coordinating Amendment 12.1. If Bill C-59, introduced in the first session of the 44th Parliament and entitled the Fall Economic Statement Implementation Act 2023, receives royal assent, then on the first day on which both subsection 2472 of that Act and section 7.2 of this Act are in force, subsection 79.4.1 of the Competition Act is replaced by the following.
4.1. If, as the result of an application by a person granted leave under section 103.1, the tribunal finds that a person has engaged in or is engaging in a practice of anti-competitive acts that amounts to conduct that has had or is having the effect of preventing or lessening competition substantially in a market in which the person has a plausible competitive interest, and it makes an order under subsection 1 or 2 against the person, it may also order the person against whom the order is made to pay an amount not exceeding the value of the benefit derived from the conduct that is subject of the order to be distributed among the applicant and any other person affected by the conduct in any manner that the tribunal considers appropriate. Debate. The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We who live in free market societies believe that growth and prosperity and ultimately human fulfillment are created from the bottom up, not government down. That's a quote by the great Ronald Reagan. And after 8 years of the Sybil NDP government, it's abundantly clear that they're not worth the cost. Their economic mismanagement, malpractice, and neglect on the economy has led to some of the most miserable outcomes for Canadians today. I mean, when you have a prime minister that says budgets will balance themselves and doesn't think about monetary policy, but is the same cause and effect of that monetary policy and the misery of Canadians, it truly shows that they have absolutely no idea what they're doing today. And what's happening because of that cause and effect is that Canadians today are more reliant on the government. And whether this is intentional or not by this Liberal NDP government, at the end of the day, it's the pain and the misery that Canadians are facing that is making what we used to know as the Canadian dream fade away. And whether your family has been here for generations or you're working hard to become a Canadian citizen, more and more it's clear that that same Canadian dream is gone. When we see that this government spent more than every one of them before them combined, that led to 40-year highs in inflation, the most rapid interest rate hikes not seen in Canadian history, putting Canadians most at risk in the G7 of a mortgage default crisis. That Canadian dream is gone. Everything is up in this country. Rents, mortgages, food prices, the debt, taxes, everything is up. It's sad that the only thing that's truly down right now is the economy. And it comes back to the cause and effect by this Liberal NDP government that doesn't think about monetary policy, but is the cause of that monetary policy. And everything feels like it's broken. Canadians that open their fridges, open their bank accounts, are seeing that the government is not only taking more, but leaving them with less and worse outcomes than ever before. The misery is real. We travel across this country, we hear that pain from everybody. Because when the government is taking more, it means they're taking more from somebody, and that is more from Canadians. Their paychecks are shrinking. You throw on a job-killing carbon tax scam on top of that, that's not only making the cost of food prices go up, but it's also taking more away from Canadians on their utility bills, from when they're filling up gas, just to do everyday basic necessities. Under this Liberal NDP government of 8 years, the most basic things have become a luxury, like heating your home, filling up gas, even buying groceries these days. People are cutting back after 8 years of this government. And there's a phenomenon that has begun in the middle class. It's that a middle-class family with 2 income earners are now going into food banks because they cannot afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. This is the cause and effect of a prime minister that doesn't think about monetary policy. Housing. Housing has doubled. There's double trouble everywhere. They've doubled the cost of rent and mortgages because of all that deficit spending that they did and the debt of more than $500 billion that led to those interest rate hikes to tackle the inflation that was caused by this government. But the other side to the equation is also housing supply, which is also affected by the mismanagement and all this government spending. Because not only are people not able to get into homes because of the low supply, but because of the high interest rates caused by all this spending, new home buyers cannot get into the homes, new homes that they want to get into. And the other side of that equation is the builders. Builders are affected by not being able to build because of those high interest rates. That's why it's double trouble by this double trouble of Liberal NDP government. And once again, everything is up. The cost of everything is up. It's exploded. Housing is not being focused on, or the issue is not being tackled. We're seeing a lot of photo ops. There's a huge fund that they put aside for photo ops, but there's nothing concrete for things getting built. And in fact, the CMHC...
Hey guys, I'm going to restart the stream. There seems to be some difficulties going on here. I'm going to restart it and start up a new one.
At a time when the government says we have a housing accelerator. It's too bad everything they're doing is decelerating homes being built in this country. They're decelerating the economy as well. As we see the American side, America's